The stale scent of yesterday's lukewarm coffee hung in the air, a phantom limb of a meeting long past. Denise Parker moved with an almost practiced grace, her hands navigating the cold, impersonal surfaces of the Hamilton and Reese conference room. Each swipe of the microfiber cloth across the polished mahogany table, each press of the vacuum's nozzle against the plush carpet, was a quiet ritual. A ritual not of servitude, as many assumed, but of observation. She absorbed the residue of their conversations, the discarded agendas, the lingering scent of expensive cologne and cheaper anxieties. These were subjects, these executives who strutted through her domain with an air of entitled indifference. They think they know power, she thought, a flicker of amusement dancing in her eyes. They think this glass tower, these tailored suits, define them. The heavy oak door creaked open, shattering the quiet hum of the vacuum. Ethan Brooks, his youthful face already creased with the arrogance of unearned authority, swaggered in, followed by Tom Reynolds and Jessica Lane, senior partners whose laughter echoed off the stairwell walls. Denise switched off the vacuum, the sudden silence amplifying their presence. They barely acknowledged her, their conversation flowing around her like water around a rock. She was invisible, a fixture, part of the background noise of their success. A small, bitter taste rose in her throat. Invisible, am I? Ethan tossed his briefcase onto the table, the thud a small explosion in the otherwise silent room. Hey, Tom, you ever wonder what it's like to clean up after people for a living? His tone dripped with a condescending curiosity, a feigned empathy that felt more like a dissection. Tom chuckled, the sound hollow and devoid of genuine mirth. He leaned back against the table, his expensive suit barely wrinkling. I'd quit the first day, he declared, as if the very idea of such labor was beneath him. A faint, almost imperceptible tightening around Denise's lips was the only outward sign of her simmering resentment. Quit, would you? This beneath-you work pays your mortgage, fund your lavish vacations. Jessica, ever the performer, chimed in, her voice laced with a theatrical sigh. It's kind of depressing, isn't it? Imagine spending your days scrubbing other people's messes, literally and figuratively. She shuddered dramatically, as if the mere thought contaminated her. Denise's hand tightened around the vacuum's handle, the plastic creaking softly under the pressure. Depressing? You have no idea what depression is, Jessica. You've never had to claw your way out a hole so deep you couldn't see the light. She met Jessica's gaze for a fleeting second, a silent challenge in her dark eyes. Jessica, oblivious, simply looked away, her attention already drifting to the agenda on the table. Just outside the conference room, young Mark Stevens, an intern barely out of college, paused, his hand hovering over the doorknob. The snippets of conversation he'd overheard prickled at his conscience. He recognized the casual cruelty in their words, the effortless disdain. He'd seen it before, this unspoken hierarchy, this casual disregard for those deemed lesser. He'd felt it himself, the sting of being overlooked, the weight of invisibility. He watched through the narrow gap in the door, a silent observer, as Denise continued her work, her movements precise and controlled, her face an impassive mask. He wondered what she was thinking, what emotions simmered beneath that calm exterior. He felt a surge of empathy, a quiet understanding, that set him apart from the oblivious trio inside. They don't see her, he thought, a knot forming in his stomach. They don't see anything beyond their own reflection. Inside the conference room, the executives continued their pre-meeting banter, oblivious to the silent storm brewing around them. Ethan, fueled by the silent approval of his superiors, pressed on, his voice taking on a sharper edge. You know, he said, leaning closer to Tom, I bet she listens to everything we say. Probably goes home and tells her friends all about the important things she overheard. He punctuated his words with air quotes, a gesture of mocking emphasis. The laughter that followed grated on Denise's nerves. Listen, Ido. And I remember every word, every slight, every condescending glance. A slow, almost imperceptible smile played on her lips. Soon, very soon, you'll understand what it truly means to be overheard. She finished cleaning, her movements deliberate and unhurried. She straightened the chairs, aligned the notepads, and placed a fresh carafe of coffee on the table, the aroma a stark contrast to the stale remnants of their previous gathering. As she reached the door, she paused, her hand resting on the handle. She turned to face them, her gaze sweeping across their faces, lingering for a moment on each one. "Excuse me," she said, her voice soft yet firm, a subtle shift in the air signaling a change in the dynamics of the room. "I believe there's been a misunderstanding." The three executives looked up, their expressions ranging from mild annoyance to outright confusion. Ethan, ever the quickest to react, frowned. "A misunderstanding? About what?" Denise's smile widened, a slow, deliberate unfolding that sent a shiver down Mark's spine as he watched from the doorway. "About who cleans up after whom," she said, her voice now carrying a steel-like edge. "My name is Denise Parker, and I'm a CEO of Parker Cleaning Solutions. Hamilton and Reese is one of my clients." "A client?" I'm seriously reconsidering. The last sentence hung in the air, heavy with unspoken power. The silence that followed was thick with shock and disbelief. The color drained from Ethan's face, his arrogance replaced by a dawning horror. Tom and Jessica exchanged wide-eyed glances, the realization of their blunder hitting them with the force of a physical blow. Mark, watching from the doorway, felt a surge of something akin to awe. She played them, he thought, a mixture of admiration and disbelief swirling within him. She played them perfectly. The fluorescent lights hummed a monotonous tune in the deserted office, casting long, skeletal shadows that danced with the faint sway of the blinds. Mark Stevens, a summer intern barely out of college, felt a prickle of unease as he hurried through the eerily silent corridors of Hamilton and Reese. He'd left his laptop in the conference room, a rookie mistake that now had him tiptoeing through the labyrinthine office building long after everyone else had left. He chided himself internally. First week and already pulling an all-nighter. Brilliant, Stevens. Just brilliant. The conference room door creaked open, spilling a pool of artificial light into the dim hallway. Relief washed over him as he spotted his laptop, still perched precariously on the edge of the table, a silent testament to his forgetfulness. As he reached for it, a muffled murmur of voices drifted from the hallway, halting him mid-stride. He recognized the voices instantly. Ethan Brooks, the perpetually smug junior manager, along with Tom Reynolds and Jessica Lane, two senior executives whose disdain for anyone below their pay grade was practically legendary. Mark instinctively ducked behind the heavy curtains that framed the large windows overlooking the city. He wasn't eavesdropping, not really. It was more like situational awareness. The trio entered the adjacent office, their conversation growing louder. "Man, that cleaning lady is still here." Ethan's voice, laced with a familiar condescension, reached Mark's ears. He pictured Ethan's sneer, the way his eyes crinkled at the corners when he felt superior. Mark had been on the receiving end of that look more than once. "Probably takes her sweet time, so she can milk those overtime hours," Jessica chimed in, her voice sharp and brittle. Mark could almost see her meticulously manicured fingers drumming impatiently against her designer handbag. Tom chuckled, a low, rumbling sound. "You know how it is with these people. Always looking for a handout." His words, seemingly casual, carried a weight of ingrained prejudice that made Mark's stomach churn. He felt a flicker of anger, a spark of resentment towards their casual cruelty. These people? What does that even mean? He thought, his fingers tightening around the curtain fabric. Denise Parker, the cleaning lady in question, was in the conference room, barely visible from Mark's vantage point. She was meticulously wiping down the long mahogany table, her movements precise and economical. Her back was ramrod straight, her head held high, despite the disparaging remarks echoing from the next room. Mark had barely exchanged 2 words with her in the week he'd been there, but he remembered her quiet dignity, the way she met everyone's gaze with a steady, unwavering look. He wondered if she could hear them. He wondered what she was thinking. He watched her, a strange mixture of guilt and fascination churning within him. He knew he should say something, interrupt them, defend her. But a paralyzing fear held him captive. He was just an intern, a nobody. What could he possibly do against these corporate titans? The thought made him feel small, insignificant. Just another cog in the machine, he thought bitterly. Powerless. Denise's hand paused, hovering over the table. She tilted her head slightly, as if listening intently. Then, slowly, deliberately, she turned and looked directly at the curtain where Mark was hiding. Her gaze was piercing, unsettling. For a moment, Mark felt exposed, as if she could see right through the flimsy fabric and into his very soul. He held his breath, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. He felt a blush creep up his neck. She knows. She knows I'm here. The silence stretched, thick and heavy with unspoken words. In that moment, the power dynamic in the room shifted subtly, imperceptibly. The casual arrogance of the executives in the next room felt suddenly brittle, fragile. Denise's quiet stillness radiated a strength that Mark had never witnessed before. It wasn't the strength of bluster or intimidation, but something deeper, more profound. It was the quiet strength of someone who knew their own worth, regardless of what others might think. The executives continued their oblivious chatter, their words bouncing off the walls like hollow echoes. Honestly, I don't know why we even bother with a cleaning service, Ethan continued, his voice dripping with disdain. I could do a better job with my eyes closed. His laughter grated on Mark's nerves. Denise's gaze remained fixed on the curtain, her expression unreadable. Then, a faint, almost imperceptible smile played at the corners of her lips. It wasn't a smile of amusement, but something far more complex. It was a smile that held a hint of sadness, a touch of weariness, and a deep, unwavering resolve. Mark felt a shiver run down his spine. He suddenly understood. He understood why she hadn't reacted, why she hadn't risen to their bait. He understood the quiet power she held, a power they were completely oblivious to. He knew, with a certainty that settled deep in his bones, that this seemingly insignificant cleaning lady was about to teach these corporate giants a lesson they would never forget. And he, a silent, hidden witness, would have a front row seat. He clutched his laptop tighter, his knuckles turning white. The air crackled with anticipation, the silence pregnant with unspoken truths. The hum of the fluorescent lights seemed to intensify, a soundtrack to the quiet storm brewing in the heart of Hamilton and Reese. The low hum of the air conditioning unit, a constant presence in the sterile environment of Hamilton and Reese's conference room, did little to soothe the simmering impatience of the assembled executives. Ethan Brooks tapped his pen against the polished mahogany table, the rhythmic clicks a counterpoint to the nervous shuffling of papers and hushed whispers around him. He glanced at his watch for the 10th time in as many minutes. The meeting, mandatory and shrouded in an air of vague importance, was already 10 minutes behind schedule. Ethan's internal monologue, a ceaseless stream of self-assured pronouncements, churned with annoyance. Probably another pointless motivational speech from Reynolds, he thought, adjusting the knot of his tie, while we could all be closing deals. He caught Jessica Lane's eye across the table. Her carefully composed expression, the slight tightening of her lips, mirrored his own irritation. They shared a brief, knowing look, a silent acknowledgement of their shared superiority in this room full of, in Ethan's opinion, mostly dead weight. The heavy oak door swung open, interrupting the subdued buzz of conversation. All heads turned, expecting to see Tom Reynolds, their senior VP, stride in with his usual air of self-importance. Instead, a figure they barely registered in their daily lives entered. Denise, the cleaning lady. But something was different. She wasn't wearing her usual faded blue uniform. This morning, she was clad in a sharp, tailored pantsuit, the charcoal gray fabric a stark contrast to the sterile white walls of the conference room. Her presence felt strong, an anomaly in the carefully calibrated ecosystem of Hamilton and Reese. Ethan blinked, a flicker of confusion disrupting his usual smug composure. He felt a strange prickle of unease, an unsettling sensation he couldn't quite place. What was she doing here? He wondered, his internal monologue momentarily stuttering to a halt. Denise paused, her gaze sweeping over the assembled executives. The silence in the room thickened, heavy and expectant. The air conditioning hummed, a low drone underlying the sudden, palpable tension. The scent of freshly brewed coffee, usually a comforting aroma, now seemed to hang in the air with an almost cloying sweetness. Ethan felt a bead of sweat trickle down his temple. He shifted in his seat, the leather creaking beneath him, the sound amplified in the unnatural quiet. He could feel Jessica's eyes on him, questioning, searching for an explanation he didn't possess. "Good morning, everyone." Denise's voice, usually soft and almost apologetic, resonated with a newfound authority. It cut through the silence, sharp and clear. Ethan's unease intensified, morphing into a vague sense of dread. He noticed the way Tom Reynolds' jaw had tightened, the subtle flicker of surprise in Jessica's eyes. Something was undeniably, irrevocably shifting. The familiar power dynamics of the room, the unspoken hierarchy, were beginning to tremble. "Before we begin," Denise continued, her gaze steady, unwavering, "I'd like to say something." She paused again, letting the silence stretch, drawing the tension taut. Ethan held his breath, a strange pressure building in his chest. He felt a sudden, irrational urge to flee, to escape the suffocating atmosphere of the room. "My name is Denise Parker. I am the owner and CEO of Parker Facilities Management." The words hung in the air, heavy with implication. The silence that followed was absolute, broken only by the relentless hum of the air conditioning. Ethan stared at Denise, his mind struggling to process the information. His carefully constructed world, a world where he held a position of power, of superiority, was crumbling around him. Parker Facilities Management, the cleaning company, the thought echoed in his mind, a slow, dawning realization. He remembered the dismissive way he had spoken to Denise just yesterday, the casual arrogance he had displayed. Shame, hot and stinging, washed over him. Tom Reynolds cleared his throat, the sound loud and jarring in the stunned silence. He looked at Denise, his expression a mixture of disbelief and dawning comprehension. Jessica Lane, usually so composed, sat frozen, her eyes wide with shock. The young intern, Mark Stevens, watched the scene unfold with a mixture of fascination and awe. He had often witnessed the executive's casual disrespect towards Denise, and he had silently seethed at their arrogance. Now, he observed the power shift with a quiet satisfaction. Denise met each of their gazes, her expression unreadable. The subtle lines around her eyes, usually etched with weariness, now seemed to hold a hint of steel. She had spent years observing these people, witnessing their casual cruelty, their unspoken disdain. She had seen the subtle sneers, heard the whispered comments, felt the weight of their indifference. And now, the time had come to dismantle their carefully constructed world, brick by fragile brick. "As you know," Denise continued, her voice calm and measured, "Parker Facilities Management holds the cleaning contracts for several major corporations in Phoenix, including Hamilton and Reese." Her gaze settled on Ethan, the weight of her words pressing down on him like a physical force. He squirmed under her scrutiny, his face burning with shame. He wanted to apologize, to explain, but the words caught in his throat. "I believe in mutual respect and professionalism in all business dealings," Denise said, her voice rising slightly, "regardless of position or perceived status." The emphasis on perceived status hung in the air, a pointed reminder of their previous interactions. Ethan felt a wave of nausea wash over him. He had underestimated her, dismissed her, treated her as invisible. And now, his arrogance was laid bare, exposed for all to see. The meeting, its original purpose forgotten, dissolved into a series of stammered apologies and awkward explanations. The power dynamic had shifted irrevocably. Denise Parker, the quiet cleaning lady, had revealed herself to be a force to be reckoned with. The executives of Hamilton and Reese, once so assured of their own importance, were left to grapple with the uncomfortable truth of their own prejudice and the profound lesson in respect they had just received. The hum of the air conditioning continued, a constant, unchanging presence in the now charged atmosphere of the conference room. It was a sound that would forever be etched in Ethan's memory, a constant reminder of the day he learned that appearances can be deceiving and that respect, like power, can reside in the most unexpected places. The fluorescent lights of conference room A hummed, a sterile counterpoint to the simmering tension in the air. Denise Parker stood, her presence no longer diminished, but amplified, a quiet storm gathering force. Her hands, the hands Ethan Brooks had so carelessly dismissed, rested lightly on the polished mahogany table, her fingers tracing the grain. She had spent years in this building, a silent observer, a ghost in the machine of Hamilton and Reese. Years of witnessing the casual cruelty of those who considered themselves superior, the subtle slights, the dismissive glances, the unspoken assumption that she was invisible. But invisibility had its advantages. It allowed her to see, to hear, to gather information like dust motes, each one a tiny particle of truth. Now, she held those particles in her hand, ready to let them fall like an avalanche. Ethan shifted uncomfortably in his chair, the smirk that usually graced his lips replaced by a thin line of apprehension. The air conditioning, usually set to a frigid corporate temperature, suddenly felt stifling. He could feel the sweat prickling on his forehead, a stark contrast to the icy composure he usually projected. He had underestimated her, dismissed her as just another cog in the machine. Now, he realized with a growing unease, the cog had turned, and the machine was about to malfunction. Tom Reynolds and Jessica Lane, seasoned veterans of the corporate battlefield, exchanged uneasy glances. They had witnessed countless power plays, but this one felt different. There was a stillness in Denise's demeanor, a quiet strength that unnerved them. They had grown accustomed to the predictable rhythm of their world, where their positions at the top of the food chain were unquestioned. Now, that rhythm faltered, a discordant note in the carefully orchestrated symphony of their success. Mark Stevens, the intern relegated to the corner of the room, watched the unfolding drama with a mixture of fascination and fear. He had often witnessed the casual disrespect shown to the cleaning staff, a silent observer of the subtle hierarchies that permeated the office. He had felt a pang of sympathy for Denise, a quiet recognition of her dignity in the face of their indifference. Now he watched as that dignity transformed into something more formidable, something that commanded respect. "I've been coming to this building for a long time," Denise began, her voice soft yet resonant, each word carefully chosen, each syllable a precise strike against the wall of their complacency. Her gaze swept across the faces of the executives, lingering for a moment on each one, forcing them to meet her eyes, to acknowledge her presence. "I've seen things," she continued, her voice barely above a whisper, yet the silence in the room amplified her words, making them seem louder, heavier, pregnant with unspoken meaning. "I've seen people step over those they believe are beneath them." She paused, letting the weight of her words settle in the room. Ethan swallowed hard, his throat suddenly dry. He could feel the blood draining from his face, leaving him pale and clammy. He had never considered the implications of his actions, the ripple effect of his casual cruelty. He had treated her like an object, a piece of furniture, not a person. The realization struck him with the force of a physical blow. "I've heard people mock the very hands that keep their workspace clean," Denise continued, her voice gaining strength, a steel core emerging from the velvet sheath. Her gaze rested on Ethan, a silent indictment of his earlier words. He flinched, unable to meet her steady gaze. He had joked about her hands, the hands that worked tirelessly to maintain the pristine environment he took for granted. The memory of his careless words echoed in his ears, a testament to his arrogance. Jessica Lane shifted uneasily in her chair, her carefully constructed facade of composure beginning to crack. She had always prided herself on her professionalism, her ability to navigate the corporate landscape with grace and efficiency. But Denise's words chipped away at that carefully crafted image, revealing the underlying hypocrisy. She had allowed this culture of disrespect to flourish, had turned a blind eye to the subtle slights and casual cruelties that permeated their workplace. Tom Reynolds, usually so confident and assertive, felt a knot of unease tighten in his stomach. He had built his career on the principles of efficiency and results, but he had neglected the human element, the essential dignity of the people who formed the foundation of their success. Denise's words forced him to confront that uncomfortable truth, to acknowledge the ethical blind spot that had allowed this situation to fester. "So tell me," Denise said, her voice now resonating with authority, the quiet storm finally breaking. "If you don't respect the people who keep your office running, what does that say about you?" The question hung in the air, a challenge, an accusation, a mirror reflecting their own shortcomings. The silence that followed was thick with tension, the hum of the fluorescent lights the only sound in the room. The executives, stripped of their usual arrogance, sat in stunned silence, grappling with the implications of her words. They had underestimated her, dismissed her as insignificant, and now they were facing the consequences of their actions. Denise let the silence hang in the air for a moment, letting it sink in, letting it penetrate the carefully constructed walls of their indifference. Then, with a quiet dignity that commanded their attention, she continued, "I am Denise Parker, CEO of Parker Cleaning Services, and I'm here to tell you that we are reevaluating our contract with Hamilton and Reese." The words landed like a bombshell, shattering the remaining fragments of their composure. Their faces, a mixture of shock, disbelief, and dawning fear, were a testament to the sudden shift in power. They had treated her with disdain, and now she held their fate in her hands. The room, once a symbol of their authority, now felt like a prison, the walls closing in on them, the air thick with the weight of their own mistakes. The unspoken question hung heavy in the air. Would they learn their lesson? Mark Stevens, watching from the corner, felt a flicker of hope. Perhaps, he thought, this was the beginning of a change, a shift in the balance of power, a recognition of the inherent dignity of every individual, regardless of their position. The click of the closing door echoed in the sterile hallway, a sound that seemed to reverberate not just through the polished marble corridor, but through the very foundations of Hamilton and Reese. Denise Parker, her frame small, but somehow monumental in the wake of a revelation, disappeared behind the heavy oak, leaving a vacuum of stunned silence in her place. Mark Stevens, still clutching his lukewarm coffee, felt a strange prickle of unease, a sensation not unlike watching a magician pull off a particularly audacious trick. He watched as Ethan Brooks, his face now drained of its usual arrogant flush, remained rooted to the spot, his mouth slightly agape. The image of Ethan's earlier condescending smirk, so confidently plastered on his face moments before, flashed through Mark's mind, a stark contrast to the bewildered, almost frightened expression he wore now. He could practically hear the gears grinding in Ethan's head, desperately trying to reconcile the image of Denise, the meek cleaning lady, with Denise Parker, CEO of Pristine Environments, a company Hamilton and Reese relied on so heavily. Mark himself was still struggling with the cognitive dissonance. Just minutes ago, he'd witnessed Ethan, along with Tom Reynolds and Jessica Lange, treat Denise with a dismissive arrogance that bordered on cruel. Their words, dripping with condescension, echoed in the stark silence of the hallway, a testament to their utter blindness. Tom Reynolds, normally so composed, ran a hand through his thinning hair, a gesture that betrayed his inner turmoil. Jessica Lange, her carefully constructed facade of professional indifference crumbling, nervously adjusted her designer jacket, her eyes darting between the closed door and her colleagues. Mark watched them, a silent observer to their sudden, dramatic shift in demeanor. He'd seen this kind of power play before, albeit never so subtly executed. It wasn't just a change in dynamics. It was a complete inversion of the established hierarchy. The predator had become the prey. He wondered, a flicker of amusement dancing in his eyes, how they would navigate this newly treacherous terrain. Their carefully curated world, one built on unspoken assumptions and casual disregard for those they deemed beneath them, had been irrevocably shattered. The air, thick with the unspoken, crackled with a palpable tension. The silence, however, was soon broken, not by the senior executives, still frozen in their disbelieving stupor, but by a hesitant voice tinged with a mixture of awe and gratitude. Miss Parker Carla, the receptionist whose desk sat just around the corner, emerged from the alcove, her eyes wide and bright. She took a tentative step towards the closed door, as if half expecting Denise to reappear. Mark watched her intrigued. He'd often noticed Carla's quiet observations, the way she seemed to absorb the undercurrents of office politics with a keen, almost unsettling awareness. "Miss Parker, I just want to say thank you," Carla repeated, her voice gaining strength. The tremor in her tone wasn't one of fear, but of something akin to relief, perhaps even a touch of triumph. Mark could almost feel the weight of unspoken resentment lifting from her shoulders. He imagined the countless microaggressions, the casual dismissals, the subtle insults Carla must have witnessed, absorbed, and internalized over the years. The executives, blinded by their own self-importance, had likely never even registered her presence, let alone considered the impact of their behavior. "A lot of us noticed how they treat people, but we never thought," Carla's voice trailed off, the unspoken implication hanging heavy in the air. "They never thought someone like Denise, someone they perceived as powerless, could ever hold them accountable. They never thought the cleaning lady could be the one to teach them a lesson in humility." Mark, observing the scene unfold, felt a strange sense of satisfaction. He hadn't spoken a word, yet he felt strangely complicit in this quiet rebellion, this subtle shift in power. He had witnessed the entire spectacle, a silent accomplice to Denise Parker's perfectly orchestrated maneuver. He knew, with a certainty that settled deep in his bones, that this morning would mark a turning point in the otherwise stagnant atmosphere of Hamilton and Reese. The carefully constructed facade of corporate decorum had cracked, revealing the ugly truth beneath. The unspoken hierarchy, the casual disregard for those deemed insignificant, had been challenged, and the consequences, he suspected, would be far-reaching. He watched as Tom Reynolds finally broke free from his stupor, clearing his throat awkwardly. Jessica Lane, her face pale, offered a weak smile to Carla, a gesture that seemed more like a plea for forgiveness than a genuine expression of goodwill. Ethan Brooks, however, remained silent, his eyes fixed on the closed door as if expecting Denise to emerge and deliver another, more devastating blow. He looked smaller now, stripped of his arrogance, his carefully constructed persona shattered into 1,000 pieces. Mark finished his lukewarm coffee, the bitter taste strangely satisfying. He felt a sudden urge to leave, to escape the suffocating tension that still hung heavy in the air. He wanted to be anywhere but here, a silent witness to the slow, agonizing process of these executives coming to terms with their newfound vulnerability. He knew, with a grim sense of certainty, that the ripples of this morning's events would continue to spread, subtly reshaping the power dynamics within the firm. He walked towards the elevators, his footsteps echoing in the suddenly cavernous hallway, leaving the stunned executives to grapple with the wreckage of their own making. The cool, metallic hum of the elevator was a familiar soundtrack to Denise's mornings. As the polished doors slid closed, sealing her in a steel and glass box, a sigh escaped her lips, almost inaudible against the gentle whir of the machinery. The events of the morning played in her mind like a film reel, each frame etched with the raw emotions of the day. Ethan Brooks' face, first smug, then slack with disbelief, and finally contorted in a mixture of fear and shame. Tom Reynolds and Jessica Lane, their initial disdain melting into stunned silence. Even young Mark Stevens, the intern, his youthful face a canvas of surprise. Denise replayed their expressions, not with a sense of triumph, but with a quiet, heavy understanding. The charade had been necessary, a bitter pill to swallow, but a necessary one nonetheless. How many times had she endured their casual disregard, their dismissive glances, the subtle but stinging insults masked as jokes? How many mornings had she entered this very elevator, feeling the weight of their silent judgment, a cloak of invisibility wrapped around her? She glanced at her reflection in the mirrored wall, a tall, elegant woman in a simple, impeccably tailored suit. The cleaning uniform, the one that had rendered her invisible in their eyes, was gone, replaced by the armor of her true identity. CEO, owner, a title that commanded respect, a title that forced them to see her, really see her, for the first time. The irony wasn't lost on her. It wasn't the clothes, the title, or the revelation of her wealth that brought about this sudden shift in their demeanor. It was the fear of losing something they valued, something they hadn't realized they depended on. Her company, her services. The elevator slowed, the gentle hum deepening into a low growl. The numbers above the door flickered, announcing the arrival at the ground floor. As the doors began to part, Denise smoothed a non-existent wrinkle from her jacket, a small, almost unconscious gesture. She had played her part, donned the mask, and delivered her lines flawlessly. The performance was over, but the echoes of their stunned silence, their stammered apologies, resonated within her. Was it satisfaction she felt? No, not quite. It was closer to weariness, a deep-seated exhaustion born from years of navigating a world that often refused to see her worth. Stepping out into the bright Arizona sun, Denise paused, her gaze sweeping across the bustling city street. The morning air was crisp, carrying the scent of desert flowers and exhaust fumes, a peculiar blend that was uniquely Phoenix. The city was alive, pulsing with energy, oblivious to the small drama that had unfolded in the sterile confines of Hamilton and Reese. And yet, for Denise, the city felt different. The weight she had carried for so long, the burden of invisibility, had lifted. She breathed deeply, letting the crisp air fill her lungs, a cleansing breath that washed away the remnants of the morning's tension. The encounter in the conference room, the unveiling of her true identity, it wasn't about revenge, she realized. It wasn't about humiliating those who had disrespected her. It was about something far more fundamental. It was about respect, true respect, the kind that wasn't contingent on titles, wealth, or appearances. The kind that stemmed from recognizing the inherent dignity of every human being, regardless of their perceived status. Ethan Brooks, with his arrogant smirk and condescending tone, he hadn't seen her. He hadn't seen the woman, the human being beneath the cleaning uniform. He had seen a role, a function, something less than himself. And that, Denise mused, was the root of the problem. The insidious belief that some people were more deserving of respect than others. She hailed a cab, settling into the back seat with a quiet grace. As the car pulled away from the curb, her thoughts returned to the words she had spoken, words that had hung heavy in the air of the conference room. That respect isn't something you offer just because you got caught. It's something you practice every day, that it's about human decency. The way you treat people when you think no one is watching says everything about you. The words echoed in her mind, not as a triumphant declaration, but as a quiet plea, a whisper of hope for a world where such lessons wouldn't need to be learned through such elaborate charades. The city lights blurred past the car window, a kaleidoscope of colors against the deepening twilight. Denise closed her eyes, letting the rhythm of the city lull her into a state of quiet contemplation. The lesson, she knew, wasn't just for Ethan Brooks, Tom Reynolds, or Jessica Lange. It was for everyone. It was a reminder that true power wasn't about wielding authority or flaunting wealth, but about recognizing the shared humanity that bound us all. It was a reminder that the most powerful weapon wasn't money or influence, but simple human decency. The quiet strength of treating everyone with respect, not because of who they were or what they possessed, but simply because they existed. Because they, too, were part of the intricate tapestry of human life. Each thread, no matter how seemingly insignificant, contributing to the richness and complexity of the whole. And in that realization, Denise found a sense of peace, a quiet understanding that transcended the petty triumphs and fleeting victories of the day. The real victory, she knew, lay in the seeds of change that had been planted, the silent ripple effect of a lesson learned, a lesson about respect, about decency, about seeing the human being beneath the uniform, the title, the mask.